Mac was the most awesome teacher ever.
One of those 1 in 100 amazing people that's just influenced so many people's lives.
He was such a great teacher. He believed in me more than anybody else did.
Mr. McNamara was an amazing teacher, but he was more than that to all of us.
The man completely affected and changed my entire life.
He is a monumental personality in the history of education in the town of Amherst.
I grew up in Staten Island, New York, in an Irish Catholic family, 7 kids. It was suburban then. The bridge hadn't gone in to connect us to Brooklyn, so it was quite suburban. It was nice and safe, and ride our bikes in the street, not worry about getting killed, that sort of stuff. And then I attended parochial school with the nuns through 8th grade, and then with the Christian Brothers through 12th grade. One particular nun, Cinda Jones, really influenced me. She was very, very strict. And maybe my little bit of strictness came from her. But I went to high school at St. Peter's High School, finished in 62. And then I went into the Air Force because I wasn't ready for college and I wasn't ready to stay in my house anymore. My parents were happy to see me go. So I went to the Air Force, came back, went to college on Staten Island, graduated from Wagner, and then eventually Judy and I moved to Amherst in 1974.
When you decided to go to the Air Force, you believed in the cause. It wasn't just that you weren't ready for college. It was that it was something that you felt like you should do. Or tell me about your experience and why you went and what it was like being there and how it influenced the rest of your life.
When you left high school back in that day, you either went to the service or you stayed home. For instance, my brother and his wife, they were engaged. There was no living together back in those days, young men, young women. Even my friends didn't live together. Everybody stayed home, and I couldn't do that. So I went to the Air Force because I didn't want to be in the Army. And I had 2 years in New Hampshire, in Portsmouth, that I loved. Went to Hampton Beach all the time, trying to make believe I was a college kid. And then in '65, I volunteered to go to Vietnam, believing that I was going to go and save the world from communism and all that business.
Was your life in danger? What did you learn?
Well, shortly after I got there, they started mortar attacks on our tent city. So I was endangered in that way. I wasn't endangered the way the Army and the Marine guys were that were in face-to-face combat. I didn't ever have that experience. But certainly the mortar attacks were endangering and woke me up. They always came late at night, 2, 3 in the morning. And they were scary. And it made me realize that war was a pretty scary thing. And the results could be permanent.
Did you leave believing that the world needed to be rid of communism and that it was a just cause?
I came back from Vietnam with mixed feelings because there was no parades welcoming us back. I was considered a baby burner, you know. There were a lot of people who were taking a poor view of Vietnam vets, so I didn't come back and make a big deal about it being there in my neighborhood or among my friends. I did, though, during my time in Vietnam, begin to see the lies that our government was using to keep us involved there. So I came back with this seed of doubt and questioning that I didn't have when I went there. When I went there, I was all gung-ho. But I came back with doubt and questions and some anger over being used and lied to.
And then you went to college.
Then I went to college, Wagner College, on Staten Island. Met Judy there after 2 years. And had a good experience in college. It was fun. It was reasonable. There was lots of anti-war activity that I was involved in college. Because I was a vet, they would ask me to speak at these, what they called teach-ins, which were rallies among college kids that were protesting the war. So it was an exciting time. Depressing time. I met Judy in '68, which is when Kennedy got killed, Martin Luther King got killed, Nixon got elected. It was a terrible year. Judy was the bright spot in that year.
What made you become a teacher? What influenced you?
Well, I went to college. I was first a psychology degree, a psychology student, and then an English student. But I remember going to a movie, To Serve with Love, which was starring Sidney Poitier, an African-American actor, who went to England. He wanted to be an engineer, but he went to England and he took on a class of really rowdy students and made them into major gentlemen and ladies that were behaving properly. And it was probably the only movie in my life when it was over, people in the audience stood up and clapped. And I remember leaving the movie theater and thinking, I want to be like Sir.
Nice.
At the same time, I read a book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. And until that point, Judy and I and our friends had been very much hippie radicals that were trying to change the world by yelling at buildings full of Justice Department of people. And we weren't being effective, you know. And I read this book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity, that said if you want to change the world, one way you can do it is do it from within the system, get into the system, and teaching is a way to get into the system and change kids' minds. So I said those were two big influences, the movie and the book, that led me to teaching. And also my early childhood, I had taken care of my little brothers and sisters and got into the habit of being able to manage kids and do what they should do.
I don't remember you being strict. You talked about that with the nuns and keeping people in line, and you were the most enjoyable presence.
Well,
do you remember being strict?
I had the look. Do you remember the look? I could, without saying a word, I'd give a kid a look like I'm going to eat your lips off or whatever. So I was strict in a quiet sort of way. I didn't yell and scream, but I did keep really close eye on what was going on in the room. And sometimes I'd talk to people about it later, privately. I didn't make a big public spectacle, but yeah, I think I was stricter than some of the other Wildwood teachers. Some of them had no rules whatsoever. So I think I was stricter in comparison, put it that way.
I can't think of anybody who influenced my values in my formidable years like you did. I remember in that class learning about respect and valuing differences. And I think about your book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity, and I wonder what your goals were, what you were trying to impart on us. Because I know people are grateful and have sent you thank you letters like I have, and have expressed what you've done. But in your opinion, what you're trying to achieve and what did you impart on your students?
I wanted kids to feel that they were important and were good students, even if they had struggles with their academics. I wanted them to be tolerant of differences. I wanted them to be questioning any wars our country would get involved in. I wanted them to be not racist or sexist or stereotypic in any way. I remember once on the recess field, a kid called another kid a retard. And I really had a hard time from strangling the kid. So I wanted them to learn to be accepting, to see the gray in the world, you know. When I taught the Civil War unit in my class, I always talked not just about the North's perspective, but what did the Southerners think? I didn't necessarily value it, but I wanted the kids to know both sides of all stories, or all sides of all stories. So that's how I use my music to try to influence people.
That was a fun part of your class. Tell me a few of your favorite songs and why you played them for us. That was so fun when you brought your music to the classroom.
Well, I played a lot of Billy Joel because he was hot at the time. Joni Mitchell, I liked Joni Mitchell. Joan Baez I liked. The Beatles, of course. But songs I would pick often had lessons. For instance, I used to play Bad Bad Leroy Brown the same day I'd play Rocky Raccoon, because in each case the main character was in a love triangle and didn't come out too well. I also used to use Joni Mitchell's Circle Game and Harry Chapin's, what's the Harry Chapin song? About, I'm gonna grow like you, Dad, I'm gonna be a boy like,
Cats in the Cradle.
Cats in the Cradle, right. But I use a lot of Beatles, and then I use a lot of anti-war. Eve of Destruction was an anti-war song. One of my all-time favorites is Fixin' to Die, because it was the ultimate sarcastic anti-war, anti-Vietnam song. You know, come on, parents, be the first one on your block to have your kids come home in a box. You know, it was sung in a very uplifting way, but the message was very much anti-war. So, anti-war music, anti-racism music, music to just stretch kids' minds, I would try to play. Try to get them to see things differently than they maybe saw them before.
I remember Joni Mitchell's Paved Paradise.
That
was really impactful.
Yeah, that was a fun song. That was a fun one. Do you remember Circle Game?
Oh yeah.
And the seasons, they go round and round. That was, Joni Mitchell was big. Billy Joel was big. I mean, there were certain songs I couldn't play that I would have liked to have played.
Like what?
Well, words with the F-bomb and stuff like that in there, you know. I knew, even as it was, the songs I was playing, I knew that not all of my parents were anti-war people necessarily. So I always, in general, my experience with Amherst parents was very much positive. They were all very appreciative, accepting, happy to have their kids learning what they were learning with me. There'd be an occasional guy. I remember, I won't name the student, but I remember when her father came in for a parent conference, I had rolled up my flag a bit because it was blocking the blackboard. The first thing he did is came and unrolled it and straightened it out. So I knew that, I guess that his daughter probably didn't go home and tell him about some of the music I was playing her. I hope she didn't, he didn't refer to it, but most of my parent experience in Amherst was terrific. I mean, wonderful people. Trusting.
Well, Dad had a Go Nuke sticker in the office, and he valued your influence a lot. And I don't think people who are, you know, in the military or pro-nukes would be against the concept of peace. I think they appreciated your impact on the kids.
Well, now more than ever, you know, you look at some of the stupid wars we've gotten into since Vietnam.
Yeah.
They're just like Vietnam. We're going to go save the world. We don't even know what we're getting into.
No. I call it military adventurism.
Well, in Vietnam, it was very much like that. It was, you had Dow Chemical testing their napalm and their defoliants, their Agent Orange. You had the gun companies producing the M16, which was supposed to be waterproof. You had new tanks. You had all this weaponry. It was like, the war was almost like a testing ground for weaponry. It was pitiful.
So you grew up, and one of your sister
Was retarded, yes.
And you ended up after college teaching at what place?
Willowbrook State School, a horrible place. It was a dungeon. It's like the kids would lay around in their own feces. There was no training given to the kids, no training given to the aides either. It was just a horrible, horrible place.
And you and Judy went there after college.
We went, yeah. We worked there 4 years. We were part of a group that tried to change the place. We got frustrated with the administration not wanting to do it. So we brought in a muckraking reporter, Geraldo Vera. He was a young man at the time. He was like maybe 30 years old.
Local TV station or
He
something?
was a Channel 7. He was the Eyewitness News muckraker. He would always just look for injustice in the world. And he came to Willowbrook. The administration went for our jugular. They had a big rally that we were invited to. We were all called communists, the people, the 12 of us who were involved in this attempt to change the place. And they went for my jugular by changing my class. They gave me like 12 of the most violent kids in the building. And it was just to try to set me up for trouble. So we knew we had to get out, and we knew we wanted to move from New York anyway. New York at the time, in the early 70s, was a very violent, unsafe city. So we looked around and wound up in Amherst.
I think there have been a half dozen times in my life when I realized, decades after I had you in 5th and 6th grade in 79 and 80, that things you taught impacted my life and made me more capable living it. I've sent you letters every one of those times. So what impact do you believe you've had on kids? What have they told you? How many are teachers? How is the world different from your years?
Well, just in your case, I knew in 5th grade that you had leadership potential that was untapped.
Yeah.
So I sort of manipulated our world where you became more and more of a leader. To the point in 6th grade, you were the leader in many cases. So it was a matter of seeing kids and tapping into them. I do have several former students who are now teachers who say I inspire them. That may please me. But just the contact I have with kids, they're now 30, 40 years old. My Facebook friends, I have 375 Facebook friends, probably 300 of them are former students.
That's amazing.
And the contacts I have with them just are very touching and meaningful, and makes me feel that I did what I set out to do, influence people.
What did they say when they
Micah
contacted you?
talks to me about playing music in his classes, you know, like I did. It's just I don't want to invade anybody's privacy, but the comments are just so touching, you know, they just make me feel so good about my work with the kids and how it did influence them.
Absolutely.
I had a great time. I loved being in the classroom. I had a hard time going home. I loved being around the kids. Still to this day, I love being around kids. They're energizing, they're inquisitive, they're appreciative, so it's nice.
You never took a break. Usually at recess, teachers relax for a minute and cool off from their day, and you would play basketball, football, or kickball with us, and each of us felt like the star. And I was not good at sports, and somehow every day I couldn't wait to play sports with you at recess.
It was part of the goal, because I knew from watching the recess field that the dudes and the studs would take over, and the kids who were not really capable athletes would stand at the side of being included in the game, but they'd never get to touch the ball. Nobody would pass in the basketball. Nobody would throw them a pass in football. So I started getting involved just so I could change that dynamic, that a kid who is just totally clumsy on the football field would get a pass thrown to him. Even if he dropped it, that's all right. Somebody in basketball, you know, the girls wouldn't play I got the girls involved in basketball because you girls didn't have a lot of opportunities outside of school the way boys did. If you joined the town league, you'd have to play with the boys. So I think I gave up my recess because I wanted to use it as an opportunity to, again, influence kids and change the way they behaved and acted towards one another. And I remember Ethan, I remember hitting him with a pass once. We played with a Nerf football right in his chest. Also broken his ribs, but he was so happy when he caught that. It was the best moment of his month, I think. You know, so it was fun. And the kids went along, even the guys who used to be the leaders and the studs, they went along because they got their share too. I made sure they got their fair share. But recess was a highlight of my day. Getting out and playing in the snow and the freezing cold. I wouldn't do it today, I couldn't. But we did it back then.
Yeah. You told me this week that, what about the outcome of the games?
They were all ties, or somebody would win at the last second, and then I would call time, you know. If somebody who wasn't a star, particularly, made a basket, I'd say, time's up, we got to go in. And they would be the hero for the day, so.
I never knew you fixed the games so that it was a tie, or there were heroes who weren't the usual suspects. That's pretty
I fixed
cool.
a lot of things in the classroom, too. I manipulated things left and right that people didn't realize I was manipulating. Your seating arrangement, where you sat, who you were grouped with. In my mind, thought what would be a good situation, and I know I've rescued, there have been kids that weren't on a very good track, academically, socially, and I would sit them with kids that were on a better track, and they became friends and slowly but surely influenced. I can think of one girl in particular who told me I saved her life because she was heading down a rough path in 6th grade already. So
That's pretty cool.
I manipulated a lot of things.
I appreciate that. Newsmakers were so fun. You had a poster every week, and there were 7 or so pictures, and we had to say who they were and what they were. Or did we have to describe it or just put their name down?
Sometimes it was their birth date. It was easier back in your day because kids needed to go to a newsmaker or a magazine. Now they can Google. My last 2 years of teaching, it's very challenging to make newsmaker questions that couldn't be Googled real easily. But yeah, newsmakers again were an effort to expose you to parts of the world. I always had Black, Hispanic, Asian. I always had diverse number of people on the board. And I wouldn't have, I made it a point to not have, you know, people who were in the news for bad things, mass murder or, you know, that sort of thing. Being a dictator. Sometimes I put a dictator on there just to teach you kids about who a dictator was. But yeah, that was an interesting part of my life.
I bet
Creating newsmaker questions and using it to influence kids' awareness of the world.
I can't imagine many other 5th graders knew who Khrushchev was, you know? It was amazing to be able to, or Gorbachev with his stain on his forehead, and he was on that board, and you taught us to recognize who he was, and that's major, important.
One of my favorite activities in teaching was long after you were a student, I took Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire and made it into a unit of study.
Nice.
And that was a highlight of my teaching life, using that song and what it represented and who it represented and who it presented. Thalidomide and all these things that kids didn't know about.
You were so cool and all-powerful and knowledgeable to kids, and we looked up to you so much on so many levels. Like, you walked with so much confidence. You had this swagger that kind of just almost danced.
Oh, really?
You had hair like Sean Cassidy's and coolness like the Fonz.
Miss Morrison hated my hair.
What?
Miss Morrison hated my hair.
I loved your hair. It's so cool.
It was too long for her.
Well, it was amazing. And then John Lennon was shot.
Well, you kids taught me that.
And you you cried.
Yeah.
And Vietnam, when you talked about it, it was real. And you opened yourself up in ways that taught us about the world.
Well, I always wanted to have my students be friends for life. So that's why I opened up so much, I think. I just wanted them to know me, not just as a teacher of math or how to use apostrophes. I wanted them to know me. And so my goal was to have kids that were friends for life, and I've accomplished that for sure.
Tell me about your friend board.
My friends, well, I started with old friends, which was every year I'd put up the seventh graders who used to be sixth graders. I'd add to it. So I had a friends board. By the time I was done, I had 4 of them hanging up.
With pictures of former students?
Yeah. And every time kids would come to visit, that's the first place they'd go, is go over to the friends board and look it up. But it was also nice for me to just sometimes, on crazy days or, days that things weren't going so well, I'd just turn around and look at the friends board and think about the good things and think about the good times. It was a good memory for me.
So many kids. When I was in 5th and 6th grade, you'd only been teaching 3 years, but it seemed like a couple times a month, groups of 4 people would come in and give you a hug and thank you and tell you
From
about
middle
junior
school,
high.
Yeah, junior high back in the, yeah. Well, that was one of my goals, to have kids not just leave me and forget my role in their lives. So, yeah, I always welcomed them back. I loved seeing them back. There were times at Christmas or Thanksgiving where kids would be home. They weren't kids anymore. They'd be 30. They'd come to my class. They'd, Mr. Mack, don't you recognize me? It's like, no. I know the eyes, but the bald head and the beard. The guys, I had a tough time with the guys. The girls didn't change that much, but the guys did. The facial hair and beard.
So the reason why you became a teacher is because you read a book about how to change the world by influencing kids to make the world a better place. When you retired and now looking back, how have you achieved the goals of that book and that you had as a teacher? It's obvious you have. I just want to hear how you see.
Well, the connections I have with my former students is the ultimate proof of me achieving my goals. I know other teachers who were fine teachers, but they don't have the relationships with their former students that I have. And I know that because of my relationships, that's proof to me that I connected in ways with kids that I wanted to. And the book, it did allow me, or it encouraged me to think about how I could make every kid in the class a better person, better student, a better person, better athlete, whatever. And so I know that I did that in many cases. Not all. I have some former students who I would like to strangle to this day because they just came to my class not open-minded, not willing to adjust, not willing to change. And they made my life miserable, some of them, occasionally. Very few, but I could name a few, but I won't. But then there are other kids who live their dream, Ade, for instance. During math, I used to have to keep him after school to teach him math, because during math he'd be writing his stories for comic book form. And he turned out being an editor of comic books. And Miguel McNamara, I don't know if you know him, he's a little younger than you. He used to come to school all the time in camouflage camouflage fatigues. He wanted to be in the service. He's a pilot now. So there are kids who have fulfilled their dreams. That really pleases me to see that. You kids taught me how to teach, basically. or how to reach you, how to enrich you, how to enliven you, and how to squelch you. You also let me know when I was squelching or being boring. So I learned a lot from my years with you kids. What worked, what didn't work. It was fun. And it just carried through all the way to my retirement.
Why did we do the ABC walk, and what did that mean for you? That
Well,
was a very important
the ABC
annual
walk
thing.
was a way to get together, but it was also, I remember before the ABC walk, we would always have a visitor from the ABC house who would come and talk to the kids. And I wanted to see them, let them see where their money was going. But also I remember I always used to ask kids, what in the world needs to change so we don't need ABC houses? We shouldn't have ABC houses if the kids that are in there had the opportunity to learn in their home community. So it was, again, a drive that I had to change the racial dynamics we have in our country. I can't say I succeeded greatly without looking at what's going on nowadays, but I think in the lives of the kids I worked with, I changed them or encouraged them to continue on, because many of their parents were anti-racist also, and I was just mirroring their parents' perspective in many ways. But that was the purpose of the ABC walk, not just to get exercise and to be together through a day, but there was always a political purpose in mind. It wouldn't be a one-day thing. It would be 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the walk. There'd be lessons or talks about why do we have ABC houses? What is an ABC house and why do we have it? And how can we get rid of them all? What can we do to make it not necessary?
You had us having car washes and I think bake sales and earning a trip. And it was an overnight trip. And we went to Cape Cod and we went to Mystic Seaport in the 2 years I had you. And why did you do that?
To give the kids a common purpose, everybody working towards a goal, to give them an experience outside of Amherst they haven't had, but mainly just to do a group thing that was bonding, memorable. And there were memorable moments on those trips. Oh my God, we almost drowned Nelson Mandela's granddaughter at one trip to Mystic. She went into the pool, she didn't know how to swim, and she didn't know in America we say, help, help. She was just like screaming. And I remember looking at her eyes and say, that girl's in trouble, and I went in and got her. But there were some highlights to those trips that were interesting. I remember going to, my first year or two of teaching, going to Camp Wentworth. It's a nature's classroom experience. And I broke a kid's finger playing basketball, had to bring him to the hospital.
Oh no.
I also remember waking up in the morning and having like 20 of the boys just staring at me like, oh, he sleeps, he's a human being. It was classic. But those were good trips, those were experiences that, you know, it wasn't just the place we were going, it was how we were doing it. We provided our own meals, and now I wouldn't think about an overnight trip. Not now.
No, the world's changed, so the liability and the appropriateness, but how has the world changed so that you couldn't be the teacher you were in this technology, structure, big government oversight world?
Well, part of I wouldn't have time for newsmakers and playing music and the things I used to do now, because it's a very scripted, controlled curriculum come from on top. The Common Core is a federal program that basically operates like the mafia. You do Common Core in your schools, we'll give you federal money. You don't do Common Core, we won't give you money. So it's sort of like, it is like the mafia, like you get rewarded for following the Common Core, but the Common Core is very, very scripted. It's boring to me, and teachers don't have any autonomy. You open a book and you say, "Now readers, yesterday we learned that, blah, blah, blah." It gets me nauseous. When I substituted, I had to do that, and I didn't like it. That's why that's part of the reason I don't substitute as much anymore. So, but also the kids in your generation, they're more respectful of adults. Nowadays, kids have attitudes. The attitudes are really bad. They're spoiled. And it's hard. It's harder to teach nowadays because there's a lot of kids with a lot of family dysfunction. When you have family dysfunction, you have kid dysfunction in school. So it's become harder. Your classes were pretty much civilized. They didn't have a lot of family dysfunction. They're mostly two-parent families. And they had the same goals that I had. Nowadays, not all the parents have the same goals I had. Their goal is to have their kid be the top kid in the class, even if it means stomping on others in the process.
You loaned me a bag of CDs, and I'm going to
Yeah.
put together the list that you compiled of all your favorite music that you played for us. And I can't wait to have that on at the event.
That was so hard to narrow it down to an hour and 15 minutes. I could have given you 3 hours worth of music. But I played a lot of my favorites or a lot of my favorite artists. And I drove myself to provide a list that was sing-along type music. So people at the event are listening to the music. Before long, I think some of them will be singing along.
Cool.
They'll know the words and all. And maybe it'll bring them back to some Friday afternoon 30, 40 years ago, you know.
Amazing.
One of my proudest moments was I used to say to kids, the kids would come, they would be sitting in math, and they'd be doing their calculating on their thumbs. And I used to say to them, you know, if you kids had a calculator that was thumb-friendly, it would be, instead of upright like this, it would be horizontal, and you could operate with your thumbs. And I had this kid from England, he was here on sabbatical with his family, his name is Gareth. He said to me, Mr. Mack, would you mind if I tried that for the science fair? I said, go for it, Gareth. So about 6 weeks later, he comes in with this balsa wood calculator that's thumb operated. We called to them, Gareth, I got a patent on it and all. And I thought I'd be retiring from teacher and going to marketing my calculator. Turns out that none of the manufacturers would help me. They didn't want ideas from a 6th grade teacher and one of his students. They had their in-house experts. So I wrote to like 8 or 10 of the biggest calculator manufacturers, said, here's my patent, here's my pictures. I don't want anything, I'll take a penny a unit. I just want the satisfaction of this accomplishment for me and my kid. Never happened. But it was a proud moment. And Gareth and I, he's back in England, he is still in touch. He's like graduated from Oxford by now, bright boy. That was really a pleasing moment. Still no thumb-operated calculators in the stores though. And if you go to an elementary class and you watch the kids, they're all using their thumbs because it's like a Nintendo generation or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And the calculator, they make mistakes because their thumb is too big for the little tiny buttons.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any closing thoughts or messages?
Closing thoughts. Well, I'm really, really happy to spend this time with you reminiscing. My closing thoughts is I'm really, really pleased to be looking forward to June 25th and putting my arms around people again. Going to be a hug. I told people it's going to be a hug-a-thon.
That's great.
I don't think I ever felt as confident as I did in that class. That was the time when I made my first home run, scored my first basket, all because he had a way of directing the games at recess, which he was at always.
Gave my daughter a lot of confidence in herself, and she's often said that she wants to go back to Mr. Mack's class.
As he always did, challenging students to do the things, to work hard at the things they weren't great at, and empowering them to do a good job at the things that they felt like they could do.
When I was running for the first time in 1991, Brian McNamara was very, very helpful to me in my campaign, and you don't forget things like that.
I remember newsmakers and doing newsmakers and winning quite a bit, and I'm still really passionate about reading the news, but I'm currently getting my doctorate in education, and I think a huge part of that is because of him.
For the most part, I was a good kid and didn't need much reprimanding, but what I really remember is that I messed up, and you took me to task for it, and I always thought about it because it was a hard thing to do, and now I'm a teacher, and it's hard to take kids to task and make sure they see that it matters.
I'm a teacher now, and the things I do in my class are largely based on the experience that I had in his class.
I would just always see interesting things. It was, exceptionally orderly and vibrant, and it set the bar really high, and it made me inspired. It made me love teaching to see that there were such great people doing it.
The best memory I have is that my parents would not take me to see the movie Grease. So I called him up, and he hopped in the car with his wife and took me to go instead of my parents. So that is the kind of teacher he was.
One of those 1 in 100 amazing people that's just, influenced so many people's lives and done so much good in the world.
That was 1980, 1981. I can't fit my clothes from 1980. The Walkman I had doesn't work anymore. But the stuff that I learned from him then, I literally use every single day of my life. And I don't just mean the things that I learned from him as an instructor in terms of how to write a sentence or what have you. I mean the values that he instilled in terms of fair play, in terms of honesty, in terms of paying attention to what's happening in the news, in terms of listening to music and paying attention to the lyrics and the meaning and what the people represent. These are lessons that I walk with every single day.
The first day that I came to the school, Mac took me and he sat me down to this little tiny round table and he introduced me to two people, David Sammons and Ben Nugent, and we've stayed in touch for all these years.
The most important memory I remember from Mac was the fact that he always tried to teach us about thinking outside the box. Don't take everything for face value. Look into it, study it, and then make a decision for yourself.
Every Friday afternoon we would be sitting around or lying around on the rug, and he would put music on the turntable: Beatles, Rolling Stones, Billy Joel, Supertramp, Dire Straits, Joni Mitchell, Harry Chapin, Jim Croce, and give us the lyric sheet, and we'd talk about the songs and the meaning and the significance in our lives and in the world around us. And a year has not gone by for me in the classroom that I haven't used that style of teaching.
Really enjoyed being in his class. I felt like my confidence really grew in his class. I was very shy and quiet and afraid to take any risks. And I felt safe enough in his class to express myself more and to start doing things that I didn't think I could do.
The man completely affected and changed my entire life.
He is a monumental personality in the history of education in the town of Amherst.